This episode of the Total Soccer Show is brought to you by Enclosed. Looking for something different for your significant other this holiday that might spice things up just a little bit? Why not get them high-end lingerie from Enclosed? It's a pretty solid system. You tell them what you think your significant other would like. They will choose the styles. They take care of all the details for you. They customize everything based on your preferences. And the best part is that it fits 98% of the time, so you don't have to worry about sizing issues either. Right now, our listeners can get $35 off any multi-month gift by going to enclosedlingerie.com. That's ENCLOSED lingerie.com and using the code TSS at checkout to get $35 off. We know the code was not working previously. It should be back working. They should have you covered. So check out enclosedlingerie.com and get $35 off any multi-month gift. Thank you once again to Enclosed for sponsoring today's episode. Now, on with today's show. Welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am your host for this week, Taylor Rockwell. Daryl Grove still in England, but that's okay because I've got a different friend to help break down the January camp roster, Gregg Berhalter's first U.S. roster. We've got Bobby Warshaw of MLSsoccer.com. We saw Bobby in Atlanta. We love getting to chat with Bobby, but we love having him on to talk about the national team, about Major League Soccer, about his own thoughts about soccer, because he has those. I think the thing I really enjoy about chatting with Bobby is that he's not afraid to look at things differently, approach kind of agreed upon ideas in a different way, and it does bring about either interesting conversation or at the least entertaining conversation. Unless you're Matt Doyle, then maybe it just brings about migraines. But either way, I like chatting with Bobby. I enjoyed this one very much. We, at the end, I think, talk about the LA Galaxy and Atlanta coaching vacancies. Before that, we talked a little bit about Bobby's preferred starting 11 if the U.S. national team had to win a game right now. Daryl and I gave our answers last week. Bobby gave his last week as well. He's now here to explain why he thought DeMarcus Beasley should be the starting left back. And then, working backwards in chronological order, we begin the show by talking about Gregg Berhalter's first roster as head coach of the U.S. national team, some of the players involved, some of the players that we're both excited to see, and then maybe what the roster tells us about Berhalter's plan going forward. So lots of great content in there. It is a fast-paced conversation. I hope you enjoy. So without further ado, I've got Mr. Bobby Warshaw. Bobby, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Sure, thanks for having me, man. I always enjoy this.
Yeah, I think it might be the first time that you and I have done an interview, just the two of us. I think one time it was me and Daryl. One time it was you and Daryl. He is gone, so we don't even need him. So it's you and me to talk lots and lots of things.
I was wondering if you were just shirking me, man, just avoiding having me on the show.
Not at all, although it has been the case that I think initially you were going to be on Tuesday, then we pushed it to yesterday, then I realized the roster was coming out, so it was going to be today, and then we pushed it about 5 more minutes because I was struggling to get to the office on time. But we're here now.
Yeah, this will cost you a beer at some point.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, here's where I want to start, though, because I do want to get to the U.S. roster, which came out today. I want to talk a little bit Gregg Berhalter. I want to talk Major League Soccer and some moves that have happened. We also asked you last week about your U.S. national team starting 11 if you were to do one right now. You gave us that. I want to break that down. But I want to start with this. I want to start with Atlanta, where we were playing some five-a-side, some small-sided. Mm-hmm. And during a break, Bobby turned to me and said, I don't know if he was trying to hurt me, but you said I played like Mixed Discarud, and I'd like to start there. Were you trying to pick a fight?
Well, do people know? I think from listening to the show and just knowing you a little bit, that I thought that you were more of a Will Trapp.
Uh-oh.
You know, that you were a little bit more defensive midfield, gritty, would win an interception and play a quick pass. But no, you're definitely a little bit more of a Clint Dempsey-esque.
Oh, okay, we've changed it to Dempsey now. I'll take that. I'll take Dempsey.
Yeah. But that caught me off guard seeing your playing style.
Wait, so is it just my sullenness and how I just want to fish, or was it something else?
I think it was your penchant to go for Meg.
Okay, that sounds about right. And I would put you, for people wondering, I put Bobby in the Tyler Adams category. I thought about this because you cover lots of ground, you keep the tempo going, you put in some tackles, and you can score some goals. I'd say that about does it. And I think I've seen him wear gloves as well, so it all fits.
I would say in a 5v5 field against a bunch of people who were out drinking the night before, I look like Tyler Adams. I would say on an actual soccer field, I look a little bit more like Dale Grove, but I'll take the Tyler Adams when I can get it.
All right, that works. Well, speaking of drinking, I believe Matt Doyle also tried to trade you to the Total Soccer Show while you were in Atlanta. How did that feel to be on the trading block?
Feels like you guys are getting a great deal.
I mean, it did seem that way. It did seem that way.
Yeah, but, it's okay. I thought there should be like a 4th-round draft pick thrown in there, but, I'm cool with it.
We can give you one of our former co-hosts in case they come back into podcasting. Then you have their rights. All right, that works. That works. So let's get to it then, because I know your time is valuable. So let's get right into the new roster that was released today, Gregg Berhalter's first U.S. men's national team roster. Worth noting, as with most January camps, it is, as always, mostly, this time, all domestic-based players. It's all MLS players in this squad. So for the people who are going to react with, why is there no Weston McKennie? Why is there no Christian Pulisic? It's because we're only going MLS players. That said, Bobby, what did you make of this roster? What was your first reaction when you saw it?
Real quick, how many people listening to your show do you think don't already know that about January camp? I think about this all the time.
Mm-hmm. It's a small percentage, I would say that, but we usually will get one or two comments of like why doesn't he like Pulisic? And I think it might be different because it's a new manager. But in the past, like when Bruce Arena took over, especially this time around, or during qualifying last time, and he had that first January camp, there was a lot of questions about why no Bobby Wood, why no Pulisic, why no... I'm trying to think who else we were really worried about. Maybe I think McKennie wasn't in the conversation quite yet.
Jeff Cameron, maybe.
Yeah, that was one, yeah. So I think there's always a little bit of confusion because people see first roster and think, oh, he must be calling in his best possible players. And there's a little bit of forgetfulness about what January camp actually is, which is what historically Camp Cupcake. It's an opportunity to get some fresh faces and some veteran faces from Major League Soccer in. So all that is to say, I would say like we maybe, of all of our listeners, we'll probably hear from like 5 to 10 who will be concerned as to why there aren't European players.
Right. Okay. All right. Now hit me with the question you had.
So what was your initial reaction when you saw it? Did anything stand out, or was it kind of what you expected?
I would say that I'm so sensitized to January camp that I no longer have an initial reaction. Especially since I did a column on it and I went back and looked at the last 10. And if you go through, especially Klinsmann's January camps, you're like, holy crap. Yeah, every year they have players that, had a single good MLS season, then fell off the map. So I'm pretty much ready to expect anything at this point. But with that said, I didn't have a gut reaction to any of them. I mean, we can say some of the names that were a little surprising. Christian Ramirez and Daniel Lovitz and Alex Bono are new names into the group, or not new names, but they're surprising to see. But I don't know. Did you have a big reaction to this January camp roster?
I think I didn't, and I think part of that is because not that many players, but like Tyler Adams has just left, and so in my mind, like Tyler Adams is a player that's been there historically. Now, not so much, and so looking at it again, it was a bit more like, yeah, okay, most of those make sense. Initially, I was surprised not to see Jozy Altidore, but I forgot about the injury fitness issues there. Really, the one I was probably most excited, and as long as I saw that name, I was pretty pumped, was Russell Canouse, because he's one that I'm increasingly excited to see play for the national team, because I think he can do a job that maybe has left me scratching my head in recent history as to who can play the role I'd like him to play.
Listen, there's something you can never forget. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania breeds top-notch defensive midfielders. Keep that in mind whenever you think about professional soccer. But I agree with you, man. Russell Canouse was so good in the second half of the year. He deserves his look. There is a question about whether he's a little bit wrong time, wrong place with Gregg Berhalter, because one thing you hear Berhalter use or say all the time is disorganizing the opponent. And part of disorganizing the opponent involves both short and long passes. And I do think that Canouse can probably do the short tempo passes, but hasn't shown the same ability to check his shoulder, open his hips in a tight spot, and hit the advancing outside back on the weak side. So that will be the big test for him. He can do 9 out of 10 things, maybe 7 out of 10 things, but are one of the two or three of the things he can't do the things that are vital to a defensive midfielder under Berhalter.
So is he a player, though, who you think we'll see get considerable playing time, or do you think it's basically Will Trapp is going to be starting? If, say, Gregg Berhalter goes with roughly the formation that's been expected, do you think it's going to be Will Trapp and somebody else, or do you think Russell Canouse might get some minutes?
Ooh, so I almost entirely, with most people, I refuse to talk about the games at the end of January.
All right.
Because remember, they have 3 weeks of camp. So it's not necessarily who's the best player. It's who performs in that 3-week span will generally get rewarded at the end of camp. And maybe not always. Maybe there's other players that Berhalter knows. Like Zach Steffen, you can make a bigger bet than anything else in your entire life that Zach Steffen plays in these 2 games because he needs the caps for work permit. But other than that, it really,
I didn't think about that.
He'll probably start, but he at least needs to get the cap and play because he hopes to get that work permit by the summer. But other than that, I mean, you have to throw everything else out and say who's going to have the best 3 weeks, which is a bit of a toss-up in any 3-week span in a player's career, whether they're sharp or not. So with that said, I would love to see Canals play.
From your perspective, from your time playing, like, would you expect somebody like Jeremy Ebobisse to be in a better situation, like physically ready for this camp, as opposed to somebody who was knocked out, or didn't even make the playoffs, and thus maybe has had a longer time? Say Nick Lima, for example, not making the playoffs. He's had a longer layoff. Does that help him or does that hurt him because it's been so long since last he touched a soccer ball in a competitive match?
Well, the other part to this is you always have to get your rest. So I would say that the guys that have been off longer are more likely to be fit and sharp because they will have taken their rest. If you're done with your season, if you kind of get dismissed from your team to go home around Thanksgiving, that means that you had 3 weeks while these other teams were in the playoffs and MLS Cup to take time off. And at the professional level, you generally say shut it down completely for 10 to 20, 25 days. Literally nothing, let your body totally recover. But after that, you generally start again. So these guys that did play up until MLS Cup and late in the playoffs might still be doing that 2 to 3 weeks, maybe the tail end of it, and then ramping up their fitness. So I would expect the guys that have been off have been doing a fitness regimen and playing at home and doing what they can to get ready for this camp.
All right, and I want to stick with Ebobisse for a second because when you look at the players who are listed as forwards, at least, it's only 3. It's Ebobisse, Christian Ramirez, who you mentioned before, and Jozy Altidore. That might be the spot that I think is going, like, for people who have maybe been away from U.S. soccer or avoiding U.S. soccer for the past year, now that there's a permanent manager, are getting back into it. I feel like that's the spot where people might kind of roll their eyes in frustration. So if people have been tuning out of MLS, having to focus on the national team, are coming back in, what would you say about one or all 3 of those players that could maybe get people excited?
Nah, they're right. They're pretty right. They're fine. Like Ebobisse did a fine job throughout the end of the year, and Christian Ramirez has done a nice job and he's given a legitimate chance. And Jozy Altidore has had almost 20 goals this year. But I'm not going to convince someone that these are the guys that are going to help us get to a World Cup quarterfinal. At some point, I'm pretty optimistic. I do think that the American soccer has been taking strides in some ways, but I'm not going to try and convince you that this player pool of attackers is good enough right now. I personally like seeing these guys get a chance in the colors. I like seeing players get rewarded for good club seasons, and that's why I'm excited to see Ebobisse and Zardes in camp. But yeah, I'm not going to try and convince you that I think they're our answer to winning a World Cup.
All right, so Jeremy Ebobisse is going to win the World Cup. Got it. But I did then, let's look at it this way. Since you don't want to talk about maybe necessarily who's going to start, who's going to get all the minutes, who's going to do what, do you take any trends from the way this roster was constructed, say with those 3 forwards or from the defenders? Is there anything in there that kind of gives you an indicator as to what Gregg Berhalter is already thinking about doing?
Absolutely. This is an awesome question. So one thing, if you're new to the Columbus Crew or to Gregg Berhalter, one thing to remember is that because he plays a defined system, and we don't know what that system will be, but when I say a defined system, it means that he is detail-oriented, and whatever system he chooses, and I think there's probably 3 or 4 in his head he's thinking about, every player will have a task at every moment, because that's just the way he coaches. To be fair, that's the way Klopp and Pep and most of these elite coaches do it nowadays. But what that means is that there's also a specific profile for each position, each player. So where you might think a player is just generically a good right back, because Gregg Berhalter has such detailed instructions for that right back, he can refine and narrow the type of player he's looking for. So you say to yourself, Nick Lima, I didn't see him as a guy who could make this player pool, or Daniel Lovitz, I didn't see a guy. But Gregg Berhalter doesn't necessarily look at good players the same way you and I do. He looks at them narrowly for the way they fit into his system. So that's the one thing I would urge all fans to watch for and to follow along with Berhalter's teams, is that whether you think a player is good or not isn't important. It's, are they good in the way Gregg Berhalter wants that player to play that position?
And I don't want to, make you relive painful history if you don't want to, but like with a coach like Gregg Berhalter, I imagine with that detailed instruction, like there comes that time when maybe a player either proves they can handle that instruction and can process everything and can keep it in their brain, and then there are the players who maybe just kind of don't because they're being asked to do something different or because they're not quite used to the instructions. Maybe they can't. Have you ever seen that moment with a coach, like where it's sort of just like, yeah, okay, this maybe isn't going to work? When like, okay, I was trying this person at right back, I asked him to do a bunch of stuff, it wasn't just going to work, so you know what, you're going to be a right winger now. Like, does that type of thing happen? And like, what usually is the result? Does the player lose that confidence, or will they try something else?
I think it absolutely does happen. And people that follow me on MLSsoccer.com with the Yamil Asad, the left back, is the most famous one I've said, is that this happens fairly often where, remember, a lot of times we put people in a position, and this is going a little bit off the rails from your exact question, which is basically what I do on this show with you guys.
That's good.
But one thing we do is we put players in the positions. But if we backtrack to the original origin of a player in the position, where did that come from, right? Players are given positions in U15 and U17 in high school, in college, but why are we trusting those U17 coaches to determine the best position for that player? The brilliant thing that Pep does is Pep looks at a player's skill set and then he assigns a role and a position for them. And I'm not gonna equate Gregg Berhalter to Pep, but I do think that there's this new wave of coaches coming along that say, oh, that's pretty smart. Just because that guy played as an attacking left back or maybe a defensive left back or left center back for his team doesn't mean he can't play a different style of left back or a different style of maybe defensive midfielder. And so I'm not sure Gregg Berhalter will get that drastic, but I would just urge people to remember that players aren't positions. Players are accumulation of skills and skill sets, and then the coach's job is to figure out how can he align those skill sets with what he needs from each role. And that's what I expect Berhalter to do, with some urging and coaching, with some, hey, maybe you haven't always shown that you can pass as a center back, but I believe you can, so let me coach you through it. So I think those two sets of things will get some players to play differently than we've seen before.
That's really interesting, because it does then go back to like the patience that people have with the program. And I it's not Gregg Berhalter's fault that I think a lot of people are as frustrated as they are with U.S. soccer, but it does feel like one thing I've been saying is that it feels like he has less rope than other coaches when they're first starting, because people are already so fed up with the federation. And so it's a good reminder then that if he is playing somebody out of position, if suddenly Greg Garza is like a left winger or left midfielder in a game, there is probably a method to that apparent madness, and it's worth kind of giving Berhalter the benefit of the doubt because he's trying to figure out this player pool. So I think that's a good reminder. When do you, Bobby, then, when do you start to look at it as like, okay, that's clearly not working? Like, will you give it a couple games, or is it a pretty instantaneous read?
Oh, yeah, that was the original question that I went off. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's all good.
That's the hard part. That's the hard part about coaching. We can talk about, take Brooks Lennon MLS this year for RSL. The first three who moved from right winger, came up through the Liverpool Academy as a right winger, went to RSL as a right winger, looks like a pretty good player, got moved to right back. In the first 3 or 4 games, didn't look up to it. Reggie Cannon, the same thing at right back. First 3 or 4 games this year, he wasn't great. And then they both took off. If they had been bailed on 3 or 4 games in, which I think we can both agree makes sense. If I'm a coach, a player has 3 or 4 bad games, or at least doesn't play well in 3 or 4 straight games, I'd probably pull him out. But it's up to a coach to really believe in the philosophy and what they're doing and give them time. So I'll start by saying I don't think Berhalter is going to do anything drastic like that. I'd be surprised if he really moves players to new positions or tries anything different. But I don't have a good answer to the second part of when to bail. I mean, that's what defines a good coach, and I don't know how you can tangibly mark that.
Oh no, I mean literally you. Like if you're watching, because it sounds like you're saying you're okay with experimentation, you're okay with players being played out of position, which is a thing that I think there's a very strong reaction to, probably going back to Klinsmann of, oh, now we're just trying this again, and now we're trying this. And I will say with Klinsmann, it felt a little bit like it was just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Right.
And so I guess that's what I'm saying is, like, for you, if you're watching a game and Garza is a left midfielder, will you give him the benefit of the doubt for the whole game or for like that camp? Or is it sort of a quicker read of, yeah, this doesn't seem to be working. He doesn't seem to quite know what he's doing or what the instructions are. So maybe we can just kind of say that's not going to work for right now.
No, I would always give him time, especially if I could align the original skill set. I mean, part of the problem with Klinsmann is, and moving Alejandro Bedoya, the defensive midfielder, was the prime example of this. Like, what part of Bedoya's skill set says that he would be a good center midfielder in the way that Klinsmann theoretically wanted to play? Whereas I could build a case, and we can use Weston McKennie right now, who's playing basically center striker for Schalke lately. Like, it actually makes sense to me if you look at Weston McKennie's skill set, why a coach would play him at center striker. It hasn't worked that well lately. He gets lost and doesn't really impact games. But I could break that down and say, actually, with time, I could see this working. So as long as the skill set aligns to the role given, I'm fine to give it a few weeks, a few games.
We will get back to my conversation with Bobby in just a moment, but first I wanted to let you know that today's episode of the Total Soccer Show is brought to you by our old friends over at Roughneck Scarves. We love Roughneck Scarves. We love them because they are the official scarf provider of U.S. Soccer, of Major League Soccer, of the USL, of the NCAA, and of the Total Soccer Show. They do have the Total Soccer Show Hello and Welcome scarf. If you're looking for a maybe late Christmas gift at this point, you could go that route for somebody who needs to keep their neck warm, but also wants to support a soccer podcast. That would be fine. As I said, they're the official scarf provider of U.S. Soccer. So if you're preparing for the upcoming Women's World Cup, maybe the January camp, if you want to go that route, as Bobby and I are discussing, then there are many, many, many scarf options available for you at Roughneck Scarves. Best of all, our listeners can get 20% off by going to roughneckscarves.com. That's RUFFNECK scarves.com and using the code Total Soccer Show, all one word, at checkout. Again, that's Total Soccer Show at Roughneck Scarves to get 20% off your order. Thank you, as always, to Roughneck Scarves for sponsoring today's episode. Worth noting, they are one of our oldest and continuous sponsors. We really appreciate their support and always have. So thank you, Roughneck. Thank you to everyone who chooses to go out and get those scarves. And thank you to Bobby for continuing to talk to me. Speaking of, let's get back to that chat. One more question about a specific player within this roster. I wanted to ask you about Djordje Mihailovic, because he's a player who I've been excited about, but really can't say I'm too familiar with. I would say a big part of that is because of injuries. So for people who are in the same boat as me, who aren't quite as familiar with him, what would his skill set be? Where would you like to see him deployed for the U.S. national team?
So Doyle and I just disagreed on this morning. I see Mihailovic as the single player in this group who is a true central number 10. You know, you can give him to the ball in tough spots. He can turn. He can try and make that killer pass or that killer shot. I don't exactly – Doyle disagreed with that. I wasn't entirely clear on the way he sees them. I'm not super high on Mihailovic, but I understand his distinctiveness within this group of American players coming through right now. We really don't have any other players like that. I mean, maybe Andrew Carleton will get there. Maybe Gianluca Busio will get there. Maybe Gio Reyna turns out to be that player. But of full professionals right now, Mihailovic is really the only guy. It's unclear whether he's good enough to do it. Because if you want to do that job where you play central and you pull the strings, so to speak, and you create chances, you better be pretty dang good at that. But that's what I see his role as. Is if Berhalter wants to play with someone like a Pipa Higuain as a second striker, number 10, Mihailovic is probably the most natural player to do that right now.
And Doyle disagreed with you. Did he go first in what he thought Mihailovic would be, or was this in response to what you had said?
No, he went first.
Okay, all right. I'm always fascinated by y'all's relationship.
Me too, man. Me too.
All right, well, if you're not that up on Djordje Mihailovic, who are you excited about from this roster? Is there a player in that you think maybe people are overlooking, or who you think might come out of this camp as having improved their stock or improving their considerations? Or is it one of those things where we just have to wait and see until camp is over because it is so long?
I'm really interested to see what Aaron Long does. Because Aaron Long has this weird trait about him where he just seems... It's not disinterested and it's not aloof, but it's something along those lines. Does that make sense when I say that? Where he's just he's unfazed by moments and situations.
Yep.
And he played at the same level in college that he played at USL, that he played in MLS, right? He's not outstanding, but he's certainly pretty dang good.
Yep.
And I'm really fascinated by these players that are just the same player at every level. And the question is, can he do that at the next level? And if you look at his base skills, the pace, his ability to read the game, his aerial ability, I actually think he's a much better passer than he's shown at Red Bulls, mostly just because of the way Red Bulls play. So I'm really interested in Aaron Long. I'm really interested to see.
Can I jump in there for 1 second? Because I wanted to ask you, like, with that, because it is pretty amazing that if you can play it like a certain way in college and then play that same way at USL and then play that same way with MLS and then potentially do it with the national team, is that about, like, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but, like, is that about the simplicity of his game that you can basically, because that's what I always say to people who are, like, playing for the first time or getting back into it or moving up a level, that, like, what people want in that moment is for you to be simple. Like, they don't want you to try to dribble a bunch of people if you're not capable of doing that. Whereas if you're winning the ball and playing it and keeping it moving, then that's probably the best way to play. So do you think it is the sort of, he does the basics right and is very good at those basics and that's what lets him keep performing that way? Or is it the case that maybe he just kind of rises to the occasion and then stays at that level?
I would say it's the first one. I'd struggled to come up with a logical reason for it, but I think you nailed it, Taylor. And the other player I often thought about this way was Brian Carroll. You know, remember Brian Carroll? I bet you if you were to watch Brian Carroll.
Yeah.
Well, of course, but I bet you if you were to watch him at an amateur level or in a men's league game or an MLS game, and Jeff Lorenowitz too right now. I mean, I've seen Jeff Lorenowitz play 6v6 and 7v7 in Philly when we're both back around, and he's literally the exact same player. You wouldn't watch the field and say, wow, that guy's a MLS Cup champion. That guy's played 15 years as a starter in Major League Soccer. You'd be like, yeah, that dude's pretty average player. Pretty much the exact same thing you described about him in MLS. And I'm just very fascinated by those players, and I think you probably nailed it. It speaks to the way they play. All
right, that's good. I'm glad I nailed that one. That makes me feel better. But I did interrupt you. I think you were about to move on to Sebastian Lletget.
Yeah, I'm a huge Sebastian Lletget fan. And he wasn't great this year because he was still struggling from injury, and the Galaxy were a mess. But remember how good he was. I don't think you need to. Hurt?
I don't think you need to put that in the past tense. But yeah.
Yeah, true.
I think they are.
He
a
was
mess,
so
yeah.
good. And I think with the way we want to play, this idea of, and I do suspect Berhalter will play, and I don't have inside information on this, but if you just connect the dots, I think Berhalter will play a 4-3-3, which was a little different than the 4-2-3-1. Or basically what I'm trying to say is I don't think he'll use number 10. I think he might have a single pivot with two shuttlers in front. And I love the idea of Sebastian Lletget as one of those shuttlers, because if you're going to play that way, you need to get pressure on the ball. You need incredible work rate and mobility from those two shuttlers, which Lletget has. And also a little nuance is that he is so brave getting the ball. If you watch, and you can see it more so when you watch him up close, but he is always the one trying to find the ball, saying, just give it to me. I don't care if there's a player on me. I don't care if there's no play on options. I don't have options. Just give it to me. We'll figure it out. We'll keep the ball moving, which speaks really well to Berhalter's system. So I'm interested to see Long. I'm interested to see Lletget. And I would say those are the two big ones right now.
All right. Well, so you mentioned that you think it's going to be a 4-3-3. You think Lletget could do a very good job as a shuttler. You think there's going to be no number 10. I say all of this because this sounds suspiciously like the 4-3-3 lineup that you gave us when we asked you the hypothetical question of what would be your starting 11 right now away to Trinidad if you had to win that game. If it was like all on the line, I think it was like we're all going to be abducted by aliens and Alexis Guerreros becomes president. What do you have to do to stop that? You gave us a 4-3-3 of, I believe it was Brad Guzan in goal, DeMarcus Beasley.
Can I change my left back?
You can. I was wondering.
I'm going to put Greg Garza.
Okay.
Well, part of this. Can we chat about this for a quick sec?
Oh, absolutely. Let's do it.
Thought about the lineups.
Yeah.
Because I want to point out that it's important to note that this is only one single game, right? We're not building towards anything. This is if you have to win that game, which is really what it was to a large extent. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but if you only had to win this one game, and the other thing I want to point out is I'm not trying to argue that these players are necessarily our best 11, but going to Trinidad, only needing to draw, it's just a lineup that fits the situation the best. So screw it. Keep Beasley in there.
Okay, so you're going Beasley, Marshall, Parkhurst, and Reggie Cannon with Brad Guzan in goal. Then you had Canals, Lletget, and Adams. Jozy Altidore up top with Christian Pulisic on the right and question mark on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a player to play on the left now?
I still don't. Do you have someone I have a general idea of who I'm going to throw in, and it's undoubtedly going to get people to ugh and roll their eyes at me. But who do you think you would put?
I'm trying to remember who Daryl put out wide, and it might have been Timothy Weah, I think is who he put out there to be a little bit electrifying.
Bad choice.
I went with a 3-4-1-2, so I wasn't even concerned with the wide left because I had Greg Garza as my left wing back.
I'm fine, and I actually do think it's fairly likely that aside from the 4-3-3, I think Berhalter might also use a 3-5-2. I don't know who the two forwards are going to be right now, but long term, don't be surprised if he does do a 3-5-2 with Pulisic off of a Jozy or a Sargent.
All right. I can take that, but I also enjoyed you going Reggie Cannon because that is a thing that I think Daryl and I like to think independently of each other, but it's probably Daryl was the first one to, I think, slowly start, not even slowly, just quickly being like, I'm not sure DeAndre Yedlin has the technical ability to be an attacking fullback that we need him to be. And it does feel like it is going the way of maybe Reggie Cannon is starting to make some noise as contesting that right back spot. That's who you have starting there. What made you choose Reggie Cannon over DeAndre Yedlin?
See, I see Cannon a little differently. I agree that I'm not sure that he has the attacking ability to be an elite right back. I see him a little bit more of a disciplined, hardworking. I mean, how many outside backs or defenders would you use your first words to say disciplined, hardworking, good defenders?
Probably one or two.
They're pretty rare.
That's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty rare. But that's why I see Cannon, and I actually think that his ceiling is lower because he's not quite as good on the ball. He just doesn't have. I think by the time you're his age, you just kind of have to have that ability to read the opposing defender's balance and read the situation and be able to pull something out of nowhere, which I'm not sure Cannon has. But he's a good defender. He works hard. You know what you're going to get, which is what we wanted out of that game. Whereas Yedlin right now could have the two mistakes that cost you the game. Yep. So my lineup is largely consisting of these guys that you just trust to put in 5 out of 10 performances because, God, somebody punched me in the face. That's all it takes to beat Trinidad.
I will not, but I will agree with your consternation. We both had Russell Knaus as our holding midfielder, so that made me feel good. What made you want Chad Marshall and Michael Parkhurst as your two center backs?
Again, it just goes back to the original premise. You want players that you can trust the performance they will put in. Because if Chad Marshall and Michael Parkhurst have the same level game they've had for the last 700 of their career, and nobody's going to argue that Michael Parkhurst is a better peak than Matt Miazga or John Anthony Brooks or maybe Aaron Long. But the dude just doesn't have bad games. And the second part of that is they also just fit the way I would want to play this game. I believe that all soccer should be played, and this is a very pretty sweeping statement. You should press high, then you should drop deep. And that's what they both do really well. I'm not sure I trust either of them in a middle block chasing, Jovan Jones into a channel right now, but I would undoubtedly take either of them making smart decisions when we press and then making good decisions when we defend in the box.
All right, so we're going to be pressing with Knaus, Leggett, and Adams in that midfield, holding it down. And then we still haven't really settled on that left winger, so I'll let you continue to think about that. The other question I had was about Mr. Jozy Altidore. So the question was, if everybody was fully fit and ready to go magically, who would you go with? I'm assuming that's why you've thrown in Jozy. What do you think Jozy brings to that equation in your 4-3-3 high press, but then drop deep?
Jozy has these moments, and I actually don't think we've ever properly discussed Jozy, the right way to use him, the kind of player he is. Jozy has these moments when he's phenomenal. He's had them literally since he was 17 years old, and he's had them for the last 10 years, where he puts in a game or a month when we say, holy crap, this is everything we've ever wanted. The problem with Jozy, and I think this one we let him off the hook for, is that he has just been inconsistent about it. He's put in probably more subpar performances, and he has phenomenal performances. And I think part of that speaks to the state of the coaching in the last 7 years. I think part of that speaks to the fact that he hasn't really been challenged and he's gotten a little complacent. Same thing I would say about Michael. But Jozy at his best is so good. And I actually just think in general there's a big gap. It's not only that he's good, that there's a big gap. And I do think that with new players around him, it would kind of give him the energy to put in the Jozy-like performances we've seen.
All right, so that is Bobby's 4-3-3. We'll see what comes of it if he ever becomes manager right now, I guess is what the situation would require. But if you don't want that gig, you could potentially get the LA Galaxy gig because it seems like it's one that nobody is particularly interested in. Sam Steshko reported today that Dom Kinnear and Caleb Porter rejected LA Galaxy offers. Bobby, I know you had a theory about that, which I found particularly fascinating.
About the Galaxy?
Well, about maybe why people weren't so inclined to take that job.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think that there's this truth. There's truism in life that we don't talk about often, but mo money, mo problems. Like choice. I mean, this has been scientifically proven by psychologists, sociologists, that the more choices you have, the harder things become. And it's harder to manage your life. It's harder to manage the choices. And that's what the Galaxy are going through right now, especially with Zlatan, right? I think managing Zlatan right now would be the hardest job in Major League Soccer. Not because he's a bad guy, not because I think he's inherently hard to manage, but with his age, with his personality, with his status, with how you fit him in with 10 MLS players. So I just think there's all these things around the Galaxy right now that if I'm a coach who actually thinks that I am a good coach, and if you give me 5 years, I can get any MLS team into the upper echelon, I don't know why I bother with the Galaxy or with Zlatan, even though the ceiling might be higher.
So what do you think the future is then for the Galaxy? Because it also seems like maybe Gio dos Santos isn't the most alluring option when you're trying to figure out who to play and where. So do you think it's just going to be an ongoing search and maybe they get a retread, or do you think they look to bring in somebody new who maybe doesn't have as much MLS experience but might be willing to give the Galaxy a go?
So first of all, can we just talk about how amazing it would be? Close your eyes and picture this. Gio dos Santos and Freddie Adu as the two attacking midfielders for Las Vegas Lights. Give me that, right?
That would be pretty phenomenal. And something that I feel like Eric Winaldo would enjoy.
Right. I don't know what the Galaxy are going to do. Part of me still thinks that Caleb Porter is going to come back around. Why hasn't he signed the papers? Why hasn't it been confirmed that he's finalizing it with the crew?
Yeah.
If it's been 3 or 4 days, is he using that as a negotiating tool to get back to the Galaxy? Other than that,
that's interesting.
I would say keep an eye on Guillermo Barros Schelotto, the former crew midfielder who's been at Boca the last few years, and also Piojo at Club America, former Mexico manager. Don't be shocked if he ends up at the Galaxy.
That would be outstanding. I would love to have Miguel Herrera in Major League Soccer. You mentioned Schelotto. There's still the strong links of him with Atlanta United. What's the latest there in terms of their vacancy? Or if it's easier, who would you prefer to see take over the Atlanta job?
My thing on the Atlanta job, Schelotto seems to tick all the boxes. Because what they need is that they need status that can recruit players, but also status to keep their recruits in line. Who's Joseph Martinez really going to respect? Who is PT Martinez going to respect? Who could tell Tito Villalba that they're not going to start for 6 straight games and keep him happy? So I would say all of those things are a little bit more important than the tactical nuance and how tactically capable the coach is. But I don't have any insight or really a guess at this point who it's going to be.
All right, well, then let me ask you this as a final question. It's very much a thought experiment. Don't get me wrong, because I'm not suggesting it's going to happen.
Those.
But I am of the opinion that Jose Mourinho, if he could get his head around some of the salary and roster restrictions, would be one of the best coaches for Major League Soccer, because I think he could bring out a defensive game plan that would really frustrate, and then he could find that one marquee creative player who could score the goals. And I do think he would be very good. Do you think Jose Mourinho would be a good Major League Soccer manager, or do you think it would not go well for him?
Oh, we're doing this, huh?
We're doing it.
We're doing this. Well, why do you think it went bad at United? Let me ask you. We're just digging in because I love this topic right now.
All right. And if you got to jump at any point, just let me know. But I would say I think it went wrong when I think he maybe was trying to continue to do certain tactical approaches and certain game plans that I think have worked for him in the past that do not work as well, especially when you're going up against the kind of varied approaches that you get in the Premier League, but a lot of it being the high press. And I think that he struggled to deal with that in a way that really shuts down teams. And I think in the past, even at Chelsea, I said this when he was first being rumored to take over Man United way back when, that or not even way back when, but after Van Gaal, if you're winning every game 1-0, then you're still winning every game 1-0. And if it's boring and you're keeping the shutout, then that's fine. But it felt like he kind of was keeping it boring, but then wasn't able to solidify the defense. I know a lot of people out there will say that it's because he didn't get the players he wanted, or the players he did get underperformed. And that's maybe part of it. But I think to your point earlier, it's about finding those players and figuring out what works best for them and building your approach from there. And it felt like Mourinho sort of had his approach and then tried to hammer in players where he thought they should be, and it didn't quite work in the end.
Yeah, I'm perfectly okay with that. I guess what I was getting to is, are you sure that Jose Mourinho is still a good manager? Are you sure he didn't just get the yips somehow?
No, I'm not. It's a really confusing thing to talk about because for so much of like my like modern soccer life as an adult, Jose Mourinho has been this sort of like, oh, he's the one who you really have to game plan for. When he was managing Chelsea the first time around, I was legitimately terrified of Manchester United playing against Chelsea because I'm a Man United fan, and it felt like they just couldn't figure him out. He always had these wrinkles and adaptations and adjustments that were just impossible to deal with. And increasingly, especially lately, it feels like he's kind of lost that. And he kind of goes back to, oh, Nemanja Matic will fit in here and I'm going to play him this way. And if that doesn't work, well, I'm going to keep doing it and see what happens. And it's really strange to talk about, but given what happened in his second stint at Chelsea and then with Manchester United, I'm not sure he is as suited for the modern game, or maybe if he's like as capable of handling it anymore.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I was a huge Jozy fan for years, but when I watch that team, it does give off a little bit of a what do they actually do in training. So I want him to come less. I would love if he went to the Galaxy. Mm-hmm. Mourinho and Zlatan, oh my God. That'd almost be as good as Gio and Freddie.
Yep.
but I'm not sure I would. Yeah, I want it to happen, but yeah, I don't know what's going on in Jose, and I'm not convinced that he would crush it in MLS.
All right. I think it could go really well, or I genuinely think it could also be Ruud Gullit 2.0 of just coming and being like, what? I have to do what? I have to go here? Why can't I fly here? What is this like rule that I now have to do? No, I don't like any of this. And it could definitely implode, or it could not. And that's why I want it to happen, because it could go either way, and I think it would be fascinating no matter what, especially because I would get to watch it as a neutral as opposed to a supporter of the team. And that's what it's all about for me. Yeah. But Bobby, I know you got a busy schedule ahead of you. I know you've got some extra time radioing to do. People can find you there. Where else can people find you? Where else can people hear from you?
I would say the big thing right now is if you want a book about soccer this offseason for you or someone you know, I wrote one a few years ago about what it's like to become a professional, to be a professional, your average professional, not the same book you'll read about Wayne Rooney's life. So yeah, if you're looking for a book to get someone for this holiday season, When the Dream Became Reality, if you type in my name into Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you buy books, it'll pop up.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes, because I'll say it's not just a good read, which it is. It's a very honest read, and that's the difference, I think, is that it's not just like funny anecdotes punctuated by filler text. Like Bobby is very, because Daryl and I both read it. I think we have a copy here in the office. I have one at my house. And it's a very unflinching, like self-reflective look at becoming a professional and then being a professional. And it's definitely worth reading. So if you're looking for a good book for a soccer person in your life, I would definitely recommend Bobby's book. And I would definitely recommend listening to Bobby on Extra Time Radio or whenever he comes on here, because I do appreciate that. Like, I think you began this show by asking me a question right back at me. And I feel like you're very good at asking questions that make the host think. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you. That's really nice of you. I really enjoy this. I love talking soccer with you and Daryl, so thank you for having me.
And you're okay with talking soccer with the rest of the Extra Time Radio crew, which I know you now get to go do.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Bobby, thank you once again. Enjoy the holidays, and we will talk to you in the new year.
Thanks. See ya.